Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more The Diary of Anne Frank. Even though Italy had been conquered, last episode, Mussolini officially steps down. Um, yeah. So things for everybody that's in hiding, things are looking up. It's like, okay, now Hitler's in a two-front war. So, yeah. But, with that said, let's go ahead and jump back into this. Uh, do, do, do. Thursday, September the 16th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, relationships here in the annex are getting worse all the time. We don't dare open our mouths at mealtime except to slip a bite of food, because no matter what you say, someone is bound to resent it or take it the wrong way. Mr. Voskuil occasionally comes to visit us. Unfortunately, he's not doing very well. He isn't making it any easier for his family, because his attitude seems to be, what do I care? I'm going to die anyway. When I think how touchy everyone is here, I can just imagine what it must be like at the Voskuils. I've been taking valerian every day to fight the anxiety and depression, and it doesn't stop me from being even more miserable the next day. A good hearty laugh would help more than 10 valerian drops. But we've almost forgotten how to laugh. Sometimes I'm afraid my face is going to sag with all this sorrow, and that my mouth is going to permanently droop at the corners. The others aren't doing any better. Everyone here is dreading the great terror known as winter. Another fact that doesn't exactly brighten up our days is that Mr. Van Maren, the man who works in the warehouse, is getting suspicious about the annex. A person with any brains must have noticed by now that Miep sometimes says she's going to the lab, Bet to the file room, and Mr. Kleiman to the Opekta supplies, while Mr. Kugler claims the annex doesn't belong to this building at all, but to the one next door. We wouldn't care what Mr. Marin thought of the situation, except that he's known to be unreliable and possess a high degree of curiosity. He's not one who can be put off with a flimsy excuse. One day, Mr. Kugler wanted to be extra cautious, so at 20 past 12, he put on his coat and went to the drugstore around the corner. Less than 5 minutes later, he was back, and he sneaked up the stairs like a thief to visit us. At 1:15, he started to leave, but Bet met him on the landing and warned him that Martin was in the office. Mr. Kugler did an about face and stayed with us until 1:30. Then he took off his shoes and went in his stockinged feet, despite his code, to the front attic and down the other stairway, taking one step at a time to avoid the creaks. It took him 15 minutes to negotiate the stairs, but he wound up safely in the office after having entered from the outside. In the meantime, Bep had gotten rid of Von Modern and come to get Mr. Kugler from the annex. But he'd already left, and at that moment was still tiptoeing down the stairs. What the passerby must have thought when he saw the manager putting on his shoes outside. "Hey, you there, in the socks. Yours, Anne." Wednesday, September the 29th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, it's Mrs. Von Don's birthday. Other than one ration stamp each for cheese, meat, and bread, all she received from us was a jar of jam. Her husband, Dussel, and the office staff gave her nothing but flowers and also food. Such are the times we live in. Bep had a nervous fit last week because she had so many errands to do. 10 times a day, people were sending her out for something, each time insisting she go right away or go again, or that she'd done it all wrong. And when you think that she has her regular office work to do, that Mr. Kleiman is sick, that Miep is home with a cold, and Bep herself has a sprained ankle, boyfriend troubles, and a grouchy father, it's no wonder she's at the end of her tether. We comforted her and told her that if she'd put her foot down once or twice and say she didn't have the time, the shopping list would shrink of their own accord. Saturday there was a big drama, the likes of which have never been seen here before. It started with the direction of Von Modern and ended in the general argument and tears. Dussel complained to Mother that he was being treated like a leper, that no one was friendly to him, and that after all he hadn't done anything to deserve it. This was followed by a lot of sweet talk, which luckily Mother didn't fall for this time. She told him we were disappointed in him and that on more than one occasion he'd been a source of great annoyance. Dussel promised her the moon, but, as usual, we haven't seen so much as a beam. There's trouble brewing with the Von Dons, I can tell. Father's furious because they're cheating us. They've been holding back meat and other things. Oh, what kind of bombshell is about to burst now? If only I weren't so involved in all these skirmishes. If only I could leave here. They're driving us crazy. Yours, Anne. Sunday, October the 17th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, Mr. Kleiman is back. Thank goodness. He looks a bit pale, and yet he cheerfully set off to sell some clothes for Mr. Von Don. The disagreeable fact is that Mr. Von Don has run out of money. He lost his last 100 guilders in the warehouse, which is still creating trouble for us. The men are wondering how 100 guilders could wind up in the warehouse on a Monday morning. Suspicion abounds. Meanwhile, the 100 guilders have been stolen. Who's the thief? But I was talking about the money shortage Mrs. Von Don has scads of dresses, coats, and shoes, none of which she feels she can do without. Mr. Von Don's suit is difficult to sell, and Peter's bike was put on the block, but is back again since nobody wanted it. But the story doesn't end there. You see, Mrs. Von Don is going to have to part with her fur coat. In her opinion, the firm should pay for our upkeep, but that's ridiculous. They just had a flaming row about it and have entered the "oh my sweet pooty" and Darden Curly stage of reconciliation. My mind boggles at the profanity this honorable house has had to endure in the past month. Father walks around with his lips pressed together, and whenever he hears his name, he looks up in alarm as if he's afraid he'll be called upon to resolve another problem. Mother's so wrought up in her cheeks are blotched with red. Margot complains of headaches. Dussel can't sleep. Mrs. Von Don frets and fumes all day long, and I've gone completely round the bend. To tell you the truth, I sometimes forget who we're at odds with and who we're not. The only way to take my mind off it is to study, and I've been doing a lot of that lately. Yours, Anne. Friday, October the 29th, 1943. My dearest Kitty, Mr. Kleiman is out again. His stomach won't give him a moment's peace. He doesn't even know whether it stopped bleeding. He came to tell us that he wasn't feeling well and was going home, and for the first time he seemed really down. Mr. and Mrs. Von Don have had more raging battles. The reason is simple. They're broke. They wanted to sell an overcoat and a suit of Mr. Von Don's, but were unable to find any buyers. His prices are way too high. Some time ago, Mr. Kleiman was talking about a furrier he knows. This gave Mr. Von Don the idea of selling his wife's fur coat. It's made of rabbit skin, and she's had it for 17 years. Mrs. Von Don got 325 guilders for it, an enormous amount. She wanted to keep the money herself to buy new clothes after the war, and it took some doing before Mr. Von Don could make her understand that it was desperately needed to cover household expenses. You can't imagine the screaming, shouting, stamping of feet, and swearing that went on. It was terrifying. My family stood holding its breath at the bottom of the stairs in case it might be necessary to drag them apart. All the bickering, tears, and nervous tension have become such a stress and strain that I fall into my bed at night crying and thanking my lucky stars that I have half an hour to myself. I'm doing fine, except I've got no appetite. I keep hearing, "Goodness, you look awful." I must admit they're doing the best to keep me in condition. They're plying me with dextrose, cod liver oil, brewer's yeast, and calcium. My nerves often get the better of me, especially on Sundays. That's when I really feel miserable. The atmosphere is stifling, sluggish, leaden. Outside, you don't hear a single bird, and a deathly oppressive silence hangs over the house and clings to me as if it were going to drag me into the deepest regions of the underworld. At times like these, Father, Mother, and Margot don't matter to me in the least. I wander from room to room, climb up and down the stairs, and feel like a songbird whose wings have been ripped off and who keeps hurling itself against the bars of its dark cage. Let me out. Where's the fresh air and laughter? A voice within me cries. I don't even bother to reply anymore, but lie down on the divan. Sleep makes the silence and the terrible fear go by more quickly. Helps pass the time since it's impossible to kill it. Yours, Anne. Saturday, October the 30th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, Mother's nerves are very much on edge, and that doesn't bode well for me. It is just a coincidence that Father and Mother never scold Margot and always blame me for everything. Last night, for example, Margot was reading a book with beautiful illustrations. She got up and put the book aside for later. I wasn't doing anything, so I picked it up and began looking at the pictures. Margot came back, saw her book in my hands, knitted her brow, and angrily demanded the book back. I wanted to look through it some more. Margot got madder by the minute and Mother butted in. Margot was reading that book. Give it back to her. Father came in and without even knowing what was going on, saw that Margot was being wronged and lashed out at me. I'd like to see what you'd do if Margot was looking at one of your books. I promptly gave in, put the book down, and according to them left the room in a huff. I was neither huffy nor cross, but merely sad. It wasn't right of Father to pass judgment without knowing what the issue was. I would have given the book to Margot myself, and a lot sooner if Mother and Father hadn't intervened and rushed to take Margot's part as if she were suffering some great injustice. Of course, Mother took Margot's side. They always take each other's sides. So I'm used to that. I've become completely indifferent to Mother's rebukes and Margot's moodiness. I love them, but only because they're Mother and Margot. I don't give a darn about them as people. As far as I'm concerned, they can go jump in a lake. It's different with Father. When I see him being partial to Margot, approving Margot's every action, praising her, hugging her, I feel a gnawing ache inside because I'm crazy about him. I model myself after Father, and there's no one in the world I love more. He doesn't realize that he treats Margot differently than he does me. Margot just happens to be the smartest, the kindest, the prettiest, and the best, but I have a right to be taken seriously too. I've always been the clown and mischief maker of the family. I've always had to pay double for my sins, once with scoldings, and then again with my own sense of despair. I'm no longer satisfied with the meaningless affection or the supposedly serious talks. I long for something from Father, and he's incapable of giving. I'm not jealous of Margot. I never have been. I'm not envious of her brains or her beauty. It's just that I'd like to feel that Father really loves me, not because I'm his child, but because I'm me. And I cling to Father because my contempt of Mother is growing daily, and it's only through him that I'm able to retain the last ounce of family feeling I have left. He doesn't understand that I sometimes need to vent my feelings for Mother. He doesn't want to talk about it, and he avoids any discussion involving Mother's failings. And yet, Mother, with all her shortcomings, is tougher for me to deal with. I don't know how I should act. I can't very well confront her and her carelessness, her sarcasm, and her hard heartedness, yet I can't continue to take the blame for everything. I'm the opposite of Mother, so of course we clash. I don't mean to judge her. I don't have that right. I'm simply looking at her as a mother, and she's not a mother to me. I have to mother myself. I've cut myself adrift from them. I'm charting my own course, and we'll see where it leads me. I have no choice because I can picture what a mother and a wife should be and can't seem to find anything of the sort in the woman I'm supposed to call mother. I tell myself time and again to overlook Mother's bad example. I only want to see her good points and to look inside myself for what's lacking in her. But it doesn't work, and the worst part is that Father and Mother don't realize their own inadequacies and how much I blame them for letting me down. Are there any parents who can make their children completely happy? Sometimes I think God is trying to test me, but now and in the future I'll have to become a good person on my own without anyone to serve as a model or advise me. And it'll make me stronger in the end. Who else but me is ever going to read these letters? Who else but me can I turn to for comfort? I'm frequently in need of consolation. I often feel weak, and more often than not, I fail to meet expectations. I know this, and every day I resolve to do better. They aren't consistent in their treatment of me. One day they say that Anne's a sensible girl and entitled to know everything, and the next that Anne's a silly goose who doesn't know a thing and yet imagines she's learned all she needs to know from books. I'm no longer the baby and spoiled little darling whose every deed can be laughed at. I have my own ideas, plans, and ideals, but am unable to articulate them yet. Oh well, so much comes into my head at night when I'm alone, or during the day when I'm obliged to put up with people I can't abide who invariably misinterpret my intentions. That's why I always wind up coming back to my diary. I start there and end up there because Kitty's always patient. I promise her that despite everything, I'll keep going, that I'll find my own way and choke back my tears. I only wish I could see some results or just once receive encouragement from someone who loves me. Don't condemn me, but think of me as a person who sometimes reaches the bursting point. Yours, Anne. we'll end this episode there. But yeah. So, she's struggling. With everybody, all of them in hiding. All 4 members of the Franks, 3 members of the Von Dons, and Mr. Dussel. Yeah, 8 people in hiding. They're already on top of one another. And of course, where Anne is the youngest, you know, a young woman in her early teens. Yeah. She's often seen as the scapegoat. The one used to blame problems on. Even though it's not necessarily her fault. So yeah, growing up, already a tough thing to get through. You know, many kids don't even make it. The depression gets to them. Yeah. There's a lot to deal with. And then she's having to deal with even more than just the regular pangs of growing up. She's having to hide along with the others because there is a genocide and a war going on. And their lives are under threat. So, it's kind of doubled. Maybe even tripled all the fault that's placed at her feet. All the blame that's placed at her feet. Yes, she knows she's supposed to love Margot and her mother, but she's having a hard time. Her father was the only member of her family she truly cared for. Even though I think to a bit she still cares for her mother, for Margot, because they are family. But yeah, there's so much pressure and pain being placed at her feet, so much blame being placed at her feet, and so going beyond what's just the normal life of growing up, going through puberty. Yeah. It's one of those things. We are now we have reached the end of October. The next entry is slated in November of 43. And where did we start? I can't remember the exact date we started. First entry, June 12th, 42. So we've been through over a year now. Over a year of entries. But yeah. I'm thinking she's in her early teens. I may be incorrect on that. But I'm wanting to say she's like 12 or 13. Now, remember, the names we're using are different from the original diary. The Von Pels are known in the book as the Von Dons. Petronella, Hans, and Alfred. Their real names: Augusta, Herman, and Peter Von Pels. And Mr. Dussel, his real name was Fritz Pfeiffer. Well, I was trying to see if they had on Anne's age. Let me YouTube it. Not YouTube. Google it. age. Yeah. So she dies at the age of 15. So 43, she would be 13 at this point. So yeah, she's a young girl. She's going through growing up. At this point, it's not easy. Apparently, her sister was only 4 years older. Only lived to be 4 years older. Margot dies at the age of 19. At the same time, so yeah. They both die of typhus while in the concentration camp. So, yeah. The ending is not something joyful as you would hope. It's a book that we know the ending. It doesn't end well. The father, though, he does live, Otto Frank. Looks like Mrs. Frank dies in concentration camp as well. Because she dies in 45. Otto is the only one who survives of the Frank family. That's just painful. You lose both daughters and your wife. We know Otto would live into the 1980s. I think it's like the early 80s, but yeah. Peter Van Pels, the Von Don's son. He was 15 when he first went into hiding. He would die in the concentration camp as well. I'm trying to see if we have anybody else that survived among the 8 who went into hiding. Herman Van Pels. He was the first of the 8 to die, Mr. Von Don. Real name Van Pels. He died in October of 44 in Auschwitz. Mrs. Von Dunn looks like she dies in 44 as well. So that just leaves Fritz Pfeiffer. He died in December of 44, so he didn't live much longer than the Von Dons. We get a better look at some of the names here. Bet Voskil and Miep Gies. Victor Kugler, Johannes Kleiman, you look back at the people and it's like, you gotta remember, these were living people. They could have been your neighbor, your co-worker. Bet Boskil and Miep Gies were the secretaries at the company who would come up and try to help the Franks and the Von Dons. And Bet was the daughter of one of the big wigs at the company. Johannes Hendrik Boskil. Her full name was Elizabeth Bet Boskil. Mr. Voskil. Yeah, he was one of the people who hid the Franks and Von Dons and Mr. Dussel in the secret annex. So he's one of the big names involved. And of course, besides Bep, is Miep Gies. She was a secretary at the company, lived until 2010. And she was one of the reasons that many of the diaries of Anne survived, because they were scattered all over the secret annex after the Germans came and took them all. Miep gathered them and Miep, I think it was Miep. It might have been both Bep and Miep, but yeah. So when we hear talk of them coming up to the secret annex to visit everybody, yeah. So let's see. Born 1909. She was in her 30s during when all this was going on. Miep. Bep was born 1919, so she was really young. She was in her 20s. So yeah. This gives you a little bit of a background of the people who were there. I would say, and let us know about everything. About who the people involved were. Johannes Kleiman, he's the one who had the stomach issues. I think it was, yeah, it was Kleiman. But he was, along with Voskuil and Kugler, one of the people who helped hide the Franks and the Vandans, and so yeah, he would die in 1959, and then of course Mr. Kugler. Uh, 1981 is when he would pass. Yeah. So this gives us a look at some of the people who we're reading about, who we're talking about in the diary here. Margot. Bergen-Belsen. She was pretty, but I don't think she should have been made to feel as if she was less than Margot. According to the diary of Anne, Margot kept a diary of her own, but no trace of it has ever been found. That's one of those things that would be interesting to know. So yeah, there was like a 4-year age difference between the two girls. More or less. Yeah.
So yeah, Anne was going through all this all at once. Born June 12th, 1929, Margot, February 16th, 1926. So there's like a 3.5 year gap. It's not a full 4, but yeah. But they both died in February, March of 1945 from typhus. At Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Yeah. But I've spent enough time here kind of looking over everybody. We're almost at 55 minutes here. We'll end this video here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing. Ask them to cite their sources. I was just using Google Wikipedia. Whatever was on the front page and stuff, so. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.